Okay, thank you all for joining me here this morning. Great to have you here, and I want to jump right into it with a quick history lesson. And before you all doze off, I'd like to have a quick show of hands who here in the audience has been around since the Magento 1.0 days. Excellent, that's quite a few veterans. So I've gone back in time and I've had a look at Magento when it came out, what sort of technologies, frameworks it included out of the box when it came onto the market. Good. And as you can see, it's a fair few, but all in all, a fairly standard modern PHP framework at the time. Now, fast forward 8 years, and with the advent of Magento 2, we're looking at a technology landscape like this. So not only have the core technologies gone on to new versions, but we're dealing with a whole bigger range of technologies, frameworks that we as a developer need to get our head around when we want to work with Magento. The beauty of any complex system is we don't have to know every single part, unless, of course, your first name is Alan and you might be an expert in all of them. But as a developer, if you're dealing with just one part here, you do want to know what sort of effect it has up here. So we do have to get a rough understanding of what the technologies are that we're dealing with. So hopefully by now I've established that we as a developer, we have to keep up with what technologies come out there, and innovation happens at a quite rapid pace, and that for us means we need to be on top of that as well. But not only change in technologies, but also how we write the software for it changes over time. And people like to talk about best practice. And I do want to bring up hopefully everyone's favorite patch from the last year, which was SUPI 6788. So again, going back in time, the behavior that was replaced, which is the new best practice, was the previous best practice because that was replacing the first way of implementing that functionality, which was some regex-based controller in your config XML. So again, best practice is only a snapshot in time and advances over time as well. Well, what does that mean for us as a developer again? Well, the only constant in all of this is change, and we as a developer have to keep up with this change, and we have to continuously improve ourselves and keep learning as we deal with what innovation brings to us. And I want to wrap all this up in my topic here today, which is growing up with Magento and seeing how Magento has evolved over time and what that comes back with, again, for us as a developer. And I do want to bring a different perspective on this, which is a perspective of a single developer or a small team. As in the previous years, I've been fortunate enough to hear presentations by Fabrizio, and they've all been awesome and similar presentations. But every time when I go back to my own little chambers, the solutions were always a few sizes too big, because you see, I'm only working with a few people. And yeah, just to give you a bit of context around that, Fume, my company, we've never had more than 2 full-time developers working with Magento. To introduce myself, I figured we'd play a quick game, which since I'm in Vegas, I call the Guess the Accent game. The beauty of Magento is it fosters a worldwide community, and you will have the pleasure of this conference to hear speakers from all around the globe. And you would have heard me talking for a few minutes, so it's time to place your bets now where you think I might be coming from. Almost correct. German emigrated to New Zealand quite a few years back, but you might have had the inside knowledge coming up earlier. Further on to myself, I don't really like talking about myself, but if anyone remembers Cloud, they think I know a thing or two about Magento, and that's probably about right, as I've been working with Magento for more than 8 years by now. Keep in mind, Cloud also thinks I'm an expert in Typo 3, and I've never even downloaded, so take it with a grain of salt, as you will. Okay, my talk this morning, I'll have structured in 3 different parts. Growing up, which is a bit about us and how we deal with the technologies that change all the time. then obviously the big part, while we're all here, Magento has progressed quite a lot, and what can we learn what Magento has introduced, and how can we bring that back to our own development practices? And lastly, looking a bit further, the community has learned a lot as well, and how does that reflect on, again, our working with Magento? All right, growing up. Well, to grow up, it needs to grow. And for it to grow, you need to feed it. You need to nurture it. In short, you need to invest in it. And again, if you're a small team, once you combine that with the realization that you yourself are your biggest asset, well, you need to invest in yourself. Now, the obvious problem with all of this is we're all busy. We have our day-to-day job. We need to work on stuff. We need to earn money. And I totally understand that. As a small business owner, there's so many hats I'm wearing every day, I could open up a head shop for it. However, to make the case that investing in yourself and your processes is a good thing to do, I have a small challenge for you. I call this challenge the 4-hour challenge. And this challenge goes like this. Imagine in a week's time, I come into the office in the morning and I say, well, for the next 4 hours, please shut off your social media, your email, your phones. Spend 4 hours, and the only thing I want from you at the end of those 4 hours is that you come up with something, that you learn something, which saves you 4 minutes every day. And this is the type of stuff we do for our clients all the time, right? As in we make their lives more efficient. So all I'm asking really is that you look at yourself and only you know what you're working with every day, where you're spending most of your time. So learn something, write something, master a new tool, create a script, whatever it is, 4 minutes at the end of it. Now you might say, well, 4 minutes, that's not really all that much. But once you add that up, that's 20 minutes every week, which gives you a payback period of those 4 hours you invested of just 12 weeks. And 12 weeks, that's a phenomenal return on investment. So if you're dealing with money-type people, aka your boss, who might say, well, we don't have time for your training. If you can demonstrate those 4 minutes every day, and you can show them that it pays back in just 12 weeks, they will green light so much time for you to invest in yourself that you don't even know what to do with those. And after those 12 weeks up, you've basically earned back your initial 4 hours, and you can just keep reinvesting those as you go on. Okay, hopefully now that we've removed one of those stumbling blocks that might prohibit us from investing and putting the time aside to learn and to grow ourselves, let's have a look at what Magento has been doing and what we can learn from them, and I will share some of the lessons I've picked up working with Magento over the last year. And whenever I look at Magento 2, I can really see that they've invested really heavily in themselves and into their processes. And it's a huge step up from where we were in the old days. And the beauty of all this is, we as developers, we can use that to jumpstart our own development practices. And we can basically improve ourselves from what Magento has been doing. And some of the things I'll be putting up on screen, it's like a 20% effort, 80% result. If there's one thing we need to know working with Magento 2 is dependency injection. As in, if we want to start working with that, that's one of the main things you need to get your head around if you want to write extensions for Magento 2. And I'll just give you a quick summary of what I think is important here. If you're coming from Magento 1, if in the past you've used Mage Get Model, Mage Get Singleton, Mage Helper, Mage Get Resource Model, forget it all about it. This is all replaced with dependency injection. This topic could have its own discussion as in all by itself, but I do want to just give you the executive summary so you can have, we'll just scratch the surface basically, but do take this as an opportunity to start digging and start learning that approach. Dependency injection itself is nothing new. Magento hasn't invented it. There's a few different paradigms with dependency injection, and Magento has chosen a constructor-based paradigm. What that means? Well, every time you want to use a class, you have to pass it into the constructor so it's available further down in your class when you want to use it. I've noted here what happens behind the scenes. There's this thing called Object Manager, which takes care of basically creating that class for you and makes it available. One thing to note, if you're using, by default, Magento will give you the same instance, aka a singleton, when you pass it in a constructor like this. So if we want to actually have a model, well, this looks fairly similar to what we just had before. And behind the scenes, the object manager is calling the create method. And if you now tell me, well, Christoph, you haven't done anything differently, you're absolutely right. Dependency injection with Magento is configured in DI.XML files. And in this case, we have to get into that DI.XML file to tell Magento, well, we want the model and not the singleton. So the thing to note here is the shared equals false, which will give you a new instance every time you use it in a constructor. One other way to deal with this scenario is to have a factory which will provide you, again, with a new instance of this class for you. Okay, just a brief wrap up of some of the points. Dependency injection is constructor-based. It comes with a Magento flavor. This Magento flavor is essentially introduced with the DI.XML files. So these two taken together is what will provide dependency injection. A couple of things I do want to note from me working with dependency injection. Try to use interfaces wherever they are available. The object manager behind the scenes will give you the actual implementation of that class. If you use interfaces, that will make your code a lot more open to changes going forward. And as briefly mentioned, don't use the object manager directly, only if you're in a test. Okay, moving on to a new part which affects us as the extension developers quite a bit as well. Magento has been talking about service contracts quite a bit. And there's two aspects about it. The aspect I want to talk about here today is we as extension developers, we can also create our own service contracts. And why is that a good thing? Well, I'll start out with an example for this. I have an extension which is called email attachments. And what that extension does, well, it takes the PDF of the back end and attaches that automatically to the outgoing sales emails. So I've implemented this with a service contract. What does it allow me to do? Well, I'm also offering an extension which is called PDF Customizer. And now PDF Customizer allows you to customize those PDFs. But email attachment doesn't need to know about this extension at all because it just uses that same service contract. So my extension on this side can replace functionality. So by using a service contract, I'm open to further modifications, and I'm a lot more explicit about the code that I'm creating. So what's needed to create your own service contract? Well, not much really. As in previously, you would have written a PHP class which gives you the implementation of what you're doing. Well, the change you now have to do is, well, you create an interface for it, and then in your own DI.XML, you give a preference for your previous implementation for the service contract. And again, why is that a good thing? With not a lot of effort, we keep open our code for further modifications, and other developers can work with that as long as they adhere to the service contract. Okay, I've talked a lot about working with interfaces, and if you click on an interface in your IDE, what normally happens is, well, it takes you to the interface itself, which doesn't give you a whole lot of information because quite often you do want to know what the actual implementation looks like. So I do want to make a quick shout out here to the PHP Storm Magento 2 plugin created by Magento. So if you do work with PHP Storm, I highly recommend you download that one because as you hopefully can see what it allows you, It allows really quick navigation from the interface via the dir.xml file through to the actual implementation. And as extra bonus on top of it, it will also list what sort of plugins are configured on any given class. So again, we're cutting down on time where you previously might have been searching implements, interface, or whatever. This plugin really saves me a lot of time in my day-to-day work just to see what's happening. Moving on to highlighting some of the scope of the investment I've been seeing in Magento 2. So I've highlighted here when Magento 1.0 was released, well, how many unit tests did we have? Pretty much 0. Same for integration tests and same for functional tests. Moving on to M2, we have a huge range of unit tests out of the box, a whole lot of integration tests, and also functional test scenarios. And again, the beauty of this is we can reuse that investment for our own code. Unit testing, I really only want to mention really briefly because there's not much more to talk about. Because now that we have dependency injection, unit testing just works as you would have expected. It makes our code so much more testable. And I do want to just mention the previous pane as an extension developer. I really tried hard to make unit testing work on M1. I've been using ecom dev PHP unit, but I was fighting the framework. I was fighting the testing framework. I created PRs, ended up with my own fork. So really, I never really got the benefit of what was promised with unit testing, right? So I've put in a lot of effort, but I felt I spent more effort on the test. But working with M2, I can now really see the benefits, and they're so much easier to work with. So leave behind your M1 experience. M2 unit tests, they just work as you would expect. OK, now moving on to integration tests. And this is where the lazy developer, smart developers, will win big time, right? So Magento, they have to test their own application, and they've built an integration testing framework. And this integration testing framework is there for us to use. And they've also included a lot of things they need, which again, we can use to leapfrog our own testing approaches. And here I'll give you a few detailed examples from some of my code that I've written up till this day. So this is taken from an extension called print order PDF, where we're creating a PDF of the order. And two things to note in this test. We have a specific annotation up on top, which might set the area for this test. And we're extending from the Xtrap backend controller. Not much more is happening, except that we'd fill in a couple properties so far. So that if we were to run this now through PHP unit, magic happens. We haven't written a single test, but we're already testing our application. So 2 tests, 3 assertions. Obviously, this is coming from the abstract backend controller that we're reusing, which will provide these couple methods. So all in all, not a bad effort. For 6 lines of code, we're getting tests that the access control works how we think it is, that the routing doesn't give us a 404 on the controller that we've just implemented. Different example. In this case, extension which makes a few changes to the increment ID of the invoice. Fairly standard setup. We have an order, and we create an invoice for it, and in the end, we'll check out that the increment ID is exactly what we wanted it to be. So now those of you that had enough coffee, they might go, well, Christoph, not so fast. You're loading an order here. Where does that come from? And you're absolutely right. So far, this wouldn't work. But Magento has given us, again, a special annotation, which is the Magento data fixture. And after that, we pointed to a file which already comes with Magento, and that will create this order for us. again, we don't need to deal with creating an order. We can simply reuse what the integration testing framework comes out of the box to test our own code. So saving effort by reusing what Magento gives us. This is a complete list of annotations for the integration testing framework. I won't have time to go into each and every single one of them. The more interesting one that I've used quite a lot is the Magento config fixture, where we can, depending on the store, set a config setting and then run the integration test based off of that. I do want to have a quick shout out to Vinay's talk that he held a couple of weeks ago in London at the meetup. Do check it out. It goes into a lot more detail on unit testing and integration testing. One of the things that I did pick up is, well, an integration test, what does that give you? Well, it tells you something is broken. And a unit test will tell you exactly where that thing is broken. So that's powerful stuff for a developer, because as a developer, we want to know where we need to fix things. However, not broken does not mean it's working exactly the same way that the end user, the merchant, expects it to be. And that's where the third type of tests come in, called functional tests. They usually, well, quite often also called acceptance tests. And what they usually do is they use Selenium to remote control the browser to actually click through all the steps that are needed to verify your functionality. I'm not going to lie to you, this is probably a 4-hour project, possibly even more, but the payoff for me has been huge. And this is talking from my experience on M1, where I've set up a Selenium-based testing suite, as well as M2. So I thoroughly recommend looking into functional tests, because that will provide you with a certainty that what you're putting out is what is expected at the end of it. Another quick shout out, the Magento dev docs have a really good example on how to get started on the functional testing framework and how you can run those. Again, quick example. This is taken from Google Analytics Plus. And what that does, it injects some JavaScript into the checkout because we want to have additional tracking events. So would I like to test that I'm not stuffing up the checkout? You bet. And this is really all the PHP code that I need to make sure that the checkout still runs through. Obviously, this is Magento, so we have to back this up with a bit of XML. And this XML, I'm only listing here because that gives you the different steps that it goes through to run this scenario. And the beauty of this scenario is, well, again, all of this is stuff that Magento already does out of the box. So I don't need to write any of this. I can simply use Z for my own testing purposes. And one other extra benefit in all this is Magento itself relies on this. So if they ever decide to change the checkout, they change an ID, whatnot, they're on the hook for the maintenance of this. And I just keep running this. So again, I'm only responsible for testing my own code, and I can reuse what Magento provides me to make my life a whole lot easier. Now, to complete this example, well, we do want to check something that is provided by our own extension, and we need to have a constraint for that. So this is what's highlighted down here, and that's pretty much the only thing that I'm writing for this whole test thing. And that's the class that backs this up, and that's, again, fairly straightforward. We have an assertion where we check that the JavaScript that's injected into the page includes what we expect for that page at that time. One of the other cool things with the testing framework is, well, they've built a framework, and this framework comes with another couple features which we can make use of, which makes our life a whole lot easier. And one cool feature that I do want to highlight is, well, whenever there goes something wrong, we do want to know where that something went wrong, and the testing framework automatically saves a screenshot as well as the actual HTML that produced that error. So that allows us to go in later to figure out, well, where did our test go wrong? Another cool feature, again, similar to the integration framework, the functional testing framework, also has fixtures which we can reuse in our tests. If we're talking about orders, it comes with a few different data sets. This is the default data set for an order. And then you might go, well, Christoph, I'm dealing with a lot of orders that have discounts. Well, you're in luck. There exists a data set for you which will create an order with a coupon already applied, and you can make sure that that applies for your code, whatever you're writing. And it goes even further. If you're dealing with virtual products, well, you're in luck. There's another data set. So really, I would suggest, if you're interested in this, have a look around. Magento provides quite a few fixtures out of the box which you can easily reuse for your own purposes. There's one downside to functional tests, which is, of course, every time you have the browser step through, you have to render a whole page. Rendering a whole page takes a lot of time compared to just running a method on a class. But again, coming from the perspective of a single developer, well, you know, this is machine time versus me time. So if I can have a machine running 24/7 and that's full, well, then I just add another machine. That makes me a lot more productive working with this. Okay, moving to the wider community, and there's quite a bit that has been happening over the years as well with PHP, and where Magento has picked up a few tricks along the way. Got that? So moving straight into Composer. So Composer is obviously a tool that has gotten a lot of traction in the PHP sphere, and it's awesome to see that Magento is on board slowly with that as well. And congratulations to Composer, stable release just last week, so there really is no excuse anymore that we can't use all Exposer to take the headache out of dependency management in PHP. And the part which is awesome for me from an extension developer point of view is once you combine Composer with semantic versioning, that's where the magic happens. And again, I'll give you a quick example of how that might look in real life. So I've built an extension, and in this extension, I can say, well, I require this certain Magento module, and I can say, well, up until the next breaking release, I'm compatible. Because as long as Magento gets the version numbering right, there's not much I have to be worried about. Now, obviously, time moves on, and at some point, they will have a release which is breaking. And at that point, it comes back to me, and I have to look at my next version, and I have to assess, well, does that break affect me, yes or no? And I've given you the example here of, well, it doesn't affect me. So I only need to change my version constraint and say, hey, I've tested this version, and I'm still compatible, as it were. And there's one extra benefit in all of this as well. No project that relies on this can upgrade until I've gone through. Or set the other way around, there's no surprises. Because if there's no breaking change, my code will continue working. And everyone who attempts to upgrade, they will get a big warning saying, well, this does not match, so there is something you need to fix first. Okay, PHP itself has come a long way as well, and the thing I do want to highlight here is PHP Fig. And they've been talking a lot about standards. And obviously for us as the extension developers as well, we should take those standards on board. And what we've settled on is PSR2 for Magento, and we should apply that to our own code as well. I think there's still early days of this, but as time goes on, if you don't come on board with PSR2, you'll be looking like an outcast as time moves on. There's a tool which is called PHP CS Fixer. If you run this with this on your code, it will already does quite a few changes for you to get you more compatible. And then there's, let's call it a few line breaks left where you need to clean up your code. Okay, last I do want to share something with you, which is again coming from the single developer point of view. There's only so much you can learn from yourself, as in there's a boundary which you will hit quite soon. So for me, coming in the corner of New Zealand, I do want to keep learning, and I need to find ways of how can I pick up new skills. And what has worked really well for me is participating in Magento Stack Exchange. Virtual points is nice and all, but what it does provide me with is it gives me a challenge and a verification of my knowledge. So whenever something comes up, a question, and I put up an answer where I think I know the answer, well, I get immediate feedback, yes, your knowledge is still up to date, or if someone else comes in and gives a better answer, well, I've learned something. And also, it's not all about the answers. So one of the person that probably knows the most about Magento, Alan Storm, he's on there with 150 questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to put that on there as well, because that provides all of us with something to get challenged and improve ourselves. And then last but not least, why do I put up open source code? Well, again, this allows me to get feedback on my code. And people using it, that's really where things get real. So that's, I guess, my challenge for you. If you do want to learn, keep investing in yourself. So recapping, while we said the technology landscape innovation moves on really quickly, the only way we can deal with it is by continuously investing in ourselves. We need to keep learning. We need to keep growing. Magento has come a long way with Magento 2. We can take benefit of that a lot. Obviously, we need to get our heads around dependency injections. Service contracts are fairly easy to implement, so let's get on board with those. And then the big one is obviously the testing frameworks we can leverage for our own development purposes. And going a bit wider, learning from the community, get your heads around Composer. Semantic versioning is awesome. PSR, have a look at implementing those for your own extensions. And last but not least, get involved in the community to keep growing. All right, thank you very much.